Salutation, my esteemed students of siege warfare, and welcome back to another lecture. I am your professor, Professor Siege Captain, and today we will not be discussing a siege weapon per se, but rather a siege technique. Our deep dive will be on perhaps the greatest exploit of the physics engine in the siege meta, as we will be talking about tunneling and sapping. Before we begin the lecture proper, I must give my disclaimer. I am not a historian, nor am I actually a professor. I just play both those things on the internet. I have an unhealthy obsession with the siege, and I like to share that unhealthy obsession here with you, dear viewer. That being said, I always try my best to use a reputable source, and I try not to over-exaggerate any of my facts just to make them more interesting. History is interesting enough as is. I am a fan of history, and I want to make history interesting to the person who isn't necessarily the most interested in history themselves. With all that said, if I do get something wrong or misconstrue any information, please correct me. I don't want to live in ignorance. It is the truth that I am after, not just a funny episode. With that out of the way, let the lecture begin. Yes, my dear student, you have a question already.
Yeah, Professor, I do have a question. The question is, how dumb do you think we are? Do we really need a lecture on how to dig a hole?
I can see you don't have a proper understanding of the tunnel. Make sure you stay for my whole lecture to ensure your troops don't get trapped in your next siege tunnel. I can't think of a much worse death than suffocating or starving in a tunnel. Class, also, make sure to take notes. There will be a quiz at the end of today's lecture. What's that, dear Marcus? You love tunneling as well? I know you do. Sapping and tunneling is an ancient technique that comes pre-downloaded in the human software. There is a primal urge to dig a hole. I know every one of you have experienced it. Comment down below your favorite hole digging experience. I think most children have a story of the time that them and their friends just dug a hole for fun. I want to hear about that. For nearly 4 millennia, tunneling was the siege equivalency of cat and mouse, but underground. Our first properly documented siege tunnel experience comes to us from the OG siege lords, the ancient Assyrians. All the way back in the 8th century BC, these mad lads were digging. While other civilizations were still reading the Bronze Age patch notes, the ancient Assyrians were tunneling under their walls right below their feet. We can see in these reliefs from the 8th century BC, Assyrian soldiers tunneling away like Minecraft speedrunners. Archaeological evidence can show us the true sophistication of these tunnels. At Tel Lakesh in Israel, excavations found a tunnel spanning 1.2 meters wide, heading directly underneath the ancient wall. Well, at that time, it was just a normal wall. This is physical proof of the ancient Assyrians' tunneling capabilities during Sennacherib's reign in 701 BC. This site is rare physical proof showing exactly what the ancient texts describe, a systematic undermining of the walls. The first clear and physical proof that ancient engineers did understand that sometimes the best way over the walls was to go under them. Now, tunneling may be even more ancient than that. At the Siege of Troy, dating back to 1190 BC, we find physical proof of tunnels going underneath the walls. What we don't know is if these tunnels were dug during the siege or before the siege, as perhaps they were maybe just a convenient way to get people in and out of the city. This could show that tunneling dates back all the way to 1190 BC. The necessity for tunneling came from the humans' urge to take what isn't theirs. It was in direct response to the other human urge to build giant walls to keep what is yours. Sometimes walls would prove to be too thick, too tall, or too well defended for rams, ladders, and direct assaults. So the answer lay beneath. Urban renovation is coming one way or another. We just have to figure out a way past the walls. What began as crude guesswork of just tunneling straight underneath your enemy's walls became a true science that required a PhD in hole digging. The earliest forms of sapping, the brother of tunneling, troops setting large fires on the face of the wall. These fires would superheat the stone, and then water would be driven up to the walls, causing a thermal shock. If this doesn't destroy the walls, it's gonna at least make them a lot less stable. Thermal shock is basically nature's demolition charge. And you combine that with even bronze tools, any ancient engineer is gonna get through a wall given enough time. The Romans are known for making everything better. We all know this. They even made hole digging much, much better. As time progressed, the Romans and the Greeks worked their magic on underground tunneling. Roman reputation for tunneling became so fearsome that just the sight of them moving dirt could cause people to surrender. Talk about psychological warfare. Could you just imagine for a second that if all you need to do is roll up to a siege, throw up a screen, and then just start flinging dirt above the screen, and the enemy's gonna be like, they're tunneling, we're done, we surrender. That's a brilliant strategy. That's a brilliant strategy and a brilliant lesson into human psychology. You could cause the enemies to fail their morale saves with nothing more than shovels and dirt and the sense of impending doom. The Siege of Ambracia in 189 BC provides to us a great example of tunneling. It is perhaps one of the most detailed accounts of underground chess. Roman consul Marcus Fulvius Nobilior's, I'm sorry, Latin is not my strong suit, his forces were doing what they usually do and digging underneath the walls like you do at a siege, when the defenders came up with a great defense strategy. The historian Polybius gives us a great account of this. The Aetolians used bronze bowls full of water. So when the Romans were digging near them, the water would vibrate, and strategically placing the bronze bowls allowed them to triangulate which way the Romans were coming from. This allowed the defenders to tunnel into the Roman tunnels. If you can't beat them, join them in an underground fight club match. This is ancient sonar with bronze pots and water. When the tunnels met though, the Aetolians were smart enough to not just go straight to a fight club. They took pitch and tar and other horrible chemicals like maybe sulfur and burned them and sent the smoke into the Roman tunnels. And thus, in 189 BC, we have the birth of chemical warfare. Woo! This is a great time. Because apparently warfare in a tunnel just wasn't horrifying enough. Now we need to get chemical death into these tunnels. The most remarkable archaeological evidence we have comes from Dura Europaeus, where Sassanian Persian forces in 256 AD created a mining operation to destroy the Roman walls. They were targeting multiple wall sections simultaneously. This led Roman counter tunnels to dig into their tunnels. The Persians were expecting this though. By this time, people knew how the tunneling game worked. It was gonna be, we're gonna dig a tunnel, there's gonna be a counter tunnel, we gotta be ready for it. The Persians were ready for it. They had their pitch and sulfur ready to go. Burning this caused sulfur dioxide gas to kill 19 Roman soldiers and one friendly fire incident killing one Persian soldier. And these bodies remained in that tunnel until modern archaeologists found this tunnel with the bodies still in it, and they used the coins that were on them to date when these soldiers met this gruesome death. The Romans, being the Romans, of course, modernized and systemized tunnel digging. They used tools many architects or bricklayers would recognize these days: plumb bobs, string levels, string lines, and other measuring tools of the sort. And this allowed them to dig extremely precise tunnels, nearly geometrically perfect. And these tunnels would be supported every couple of feet with some wood support beams. The wood support beams would allow for well-timed collapse with some well-placed fires. The walls above them would simply disappear under the mighty power of the physics engine of the game. The sinking tunnel would drag the earth above it in with it, taking out anything on top. This is a valuable lesson for you students. Physics never gets patched and never will. With the fall of the Roman Empire also came a loss of knowledge in siege warfare. In addition to that, early medieval armies were a lot smaller than the armies of antiquity. This led to the fact that armies would prefer to do more sapping or undermining rather than a full-fledged tunneling operation trying to collapse large sections of walls at the time. They just didn't have the manpower to dig those giant tunnels. But by the 13th century, tunneling was back on the menu, boys. With increasing population, better tools, and those damn walls still being as tall and imposing as the past, this meant there was only one tool for the job: Tunneling. With this said though, even in the early medieval times into the late medieval times, tunneling, sapping, undermining was just gonna be used in general. If a direct assault doesn't work, of course you're gonna try to destroy the walls by either superheating them and thermal shock, tunneling under them and taking large sections out, or simply digging through them with some pickaxes. All those things were like low cost. Also at a siege, soldiers are bored. They're just sitting around at camp. They're looking for something to do. And digging a hole, that's fun. They're gonna willingly do that. I'd be willing to dig the hole until we got too close to the walls, and then I'm gonna be worrying about enemy counter tunnels. Kings would hire professional miners in their army to do the tunneling for them. They have the knowledge of mining, so might as well use it for a good purpose, like digging underneath a wall. Probably my favorite historical example is at Rochester Castle. The siege at Rochester Castle in 1215 AD represents the pinnacle of sapping. King John's forces spent 7 weeks undermining the castle keep, but the true innovation comes from King John himself. He requests 40 of the fattest pigs to be brought to him. And what does he do with these pigs? He marches those little piggies underneath the keep. When the fire is set, their high fat content causes the fire to burn even hotter. This king is kind of a mad genius to use pigs to burn a fire a little bit hotter. And this worked. The hot fire destroyed the stone supports underneath the keep. This allowed King John's forces to get into a corner of the keep. With all that history out of the way, let's get into the weapon specifications of tunneling. Well, this is where I would talk about the weapon specifications, but since this is a technique, I'm going to teach you how to tunnel properly. Siege warfare is a constant arms race, defender versus attacker. Defenders almost always have the advantage when it comes to sieges. Where they don't have the advantage is in time. The most common and prominent tactic in almost all sieges is just starve the defenders out. Encircle the town, ensure no resources can get in or out, and wait for the defenders to surrender as they starve more and more each day. But there are plenty of times where the offense was either too impatient or they knew reinforcements were on the way to save the city, and this meant they needed to get the job done. And tunneling was great at getting the job done. Tunneling is very multidisciplinary. The first science you need to understand is geology. There are places where it just doesn't make sense to dig a tunnel underneath the enemy's wall. If you're on top of hard stone like marble or granite, good luck digging through that. Knowing what the ground is made up of is going to be very helpful in your sieges. Also, knowing what you're tunneling through will help you know how many wooden supports you need to build. If you don't build enough wooden supports, well, the problem's kind of obvious. You're not going to have a tunnel for very long. You would also need to understand chemistry, specifically for proper fire burning. This comes in a couple of ways. The first of all, you need really hot fires to thermal shock a wall. Just piling up some twigs on a wall isn't going to get it done. Getting a fire to burn underground isn't as easy as you would think. Though this is mostly speculation, there are plenty of accounts of tunnels, one going straight and then fanning out underneath where the walls would have been, and another second tunnel coming into that. Historians speculate that second tunnel was to allow airflow so a fire could properly burn. Tunneling and sapping really requires a lot of violent engineering degrees. Another science comes in the form of land surveying. It is surprisingly difficult to understand where you are when you're digging a tunnel. To know how far you've gone, how much elevation you've changed, what degree your tunnel is going, where you need to fan out, what's above you to make sure you're actually digging underneath the enemy walls and not just in the middle of their field. This is no easy feat. This is where the Romans would incorporate things like string levels and measuring devices and plumb bobs to know how their tunneling is going. Another crucial element is the element WTF, the element of surprise. Many armies would build screens or walls just to hide their tunneling operations. Another clever tactic, when you knew your tunnels were just about to get in through the enemy walls, have a direct assault the same time. That way all the defenders are occupied up on the walls looking at the army that's attacking the walls, and your troops can slip right in unaware. The prime example of this is at the Siege of Veii. This siege took place in 396 BC. Roman forces under the command of Camillus attacked the city on all sides, while tunneling operations continued beneath. The intent was simple: distract the Vaetians from the mining operations and let the Roman troops finish their tunnel into the city. The historian Livy records, and I'm quoting from Livy here, "What happened to make the Romans, after never stirring from their lines for so many days, now run recklessly up to our walls?" Just then, a picked Roman force burst through the floor of the Temple of Juno, creating absolute chaos. The ultimate flanking maneuver. While tunneling could be faster than starving out the defenders, it still took time and proper logistics. If you don't have the proper tools, you're not going to be digging a tunnel at any decent rate. You need to be able to maintain the proper tools, keep sourcing them, keeping them in repair, and these tunnels are still going to take lots of time. It could take months, if not years, of digging before your tunnels are ready to be set ablaze, bringing the enemy walls down. And this leads us to our counterplay options. Listen up here, class. The next time you find yourself getting tunneled into, you're gonna wanna know these defense tactics. Prevention is better than a cure. You need to build your defenses before the tunnels are being dug. The best anti-grief solution is a moat. Moats are guaranteed to fill your enemy tunnels with water unless they dig extremely deep underneath your moat. Next, you better have also built your walls deep. Nobody likes shallow walls. Those foundations better go deep into the ground, making it all that much harder for tunnels to get underneath and harder for your walls to be sapped or undermined. For active defense, you'll need listening devices like those Greeks. Over on the other side of the world, the Chinese had even better listening devices. They basically made drums using clay pots and animal skins stretched taut over the lid. These could detect even finer vibrations in the ground. Mythbusters tested this and it worked. It worked like a dream. Once you detect the tunnel though, you'll have to fight fire with fire. You're gonna have to dig a tunnel over into the other tunnel. Counter tunneling really is the only effective response, but how you go about the counter tunneling is up to you. You can dig your tunnel straight into the enemy tunnels and fight them like a man in the underground fight club. Melee combat inside a tunnel is about the only way I could think of making melee combat even worse. If you wanted to get more clever, you can dig near the enemy tunnel and then gas them out like we heard about in previous examples. You could dig under the other tunnel and collapse their tunnel into it. You can do your best World War I German impression and gas them out. Oh, how did that gas get there? We don't know. We would never violate Geneva Convention. If only we had a trench shotgun for tunnel warfare. What would a tunnel shotgun be like? Probably be just like a normal shotgun. You can get really crazy and release something like bees or bears in a tunnel. During the Second Mithridatic War, Romans besieging the Pontic city of Themsyria discovered this tactic firsthand. When defenders discovered Romans' tunneling activities, they counter-tunneled into the Roman tunnels. And they had their druids summon bears and bees in the tunnels, and this was effective at driving the Romans out. Now that is a hell-fueled nightmare. A dark, small, cramped tunnel, and then all of a sudden a bear is attacking you? What do you even do at that point? But as with all things ancient siege, gunpowder had to come and ruin it. Cannons proved far more effective at destroying a wall. Now you don't need to waste months, if not years, digging a tunnel. You can just blast the wall to smithereens. There was a time where tunneling was coupled quite well with gunpowder and made it absolutely nuclear. Instead of setting fires and letting the wooden supports collapse, now you can just blow up a metric ton of gunpowder underneath the walls, deleting everything in an instant. Sapping remained relevant as long as there were walls, but instead of using iron tools, you just put a bomb. Tunneling has never fully disappeared. There are nightmarish stories from modern wars. Both the world wars, famously Vietnam War, and conflicts in the Middle East are still incorporating tunnels in the warfare. God, I get chills in the bad way thinking about being in those tunnels. Imagine having to face off against a gun. I was just joking about a tunnel shotgun, but that probably existed. The fact that tunneling still exists just goes to show how rooted in human nature tunneling is. I still think about the time when I was a real young kid, like 8, 9, and my parents made a joke that we could dig a tunnel over to my friend's house and connect our houses so that I could go see him more often. I still would want to do that to this day. I would dig that tunnel. But would I want the job of a siege tunnel digger? Once we're within 50 feet of the enemy walls, no, I'm not gonna dig that tunnel. I'll start the initial hole, sure, that sounds fun. But once we're fully underground to the point where a collapse is gonna kill me, I'm out of there. I'll start breaking out calculus and be like, oh yeah, you gotta go a little bit further than that, but I'm not going into that tunnel. I am not facing off against other people. I'm not gonna get smoked out. I'm not gonna get washed out. I'm not gonna fight a bear underground. I am not going to be a tunnel digger. If I'm facing off against tunnels, I'm not gonna watch half my city disappear in a single instant as the tunnel collapses. No. Good sir, you won. You're gonna spend the time and effort tunneling under me. I surrender. We can come to terms better than half my city disappearing into the ground. And this leads us to Professor Siege Captain's 100% historically accurate ranking of tunneling. I'm giving tunneling and sapping a S tier ranking. This is the first S tier. It kind of hurts me to give the first S tier ranking to not a siege weapon, but a siege tactic. But this siege tactic was so incredibly effective when pulled off. It was also pulled off at almost every siege. Obviously, this earns an S tier ranking. It's an S tier strategy. It's the pure form of humanity. Hole digging and mathematics. What is more human than hole digging and mathematics? No matter what defenses were employed, given enough time and resources, a tunnel can beat it. It can get past a moat, it can get past the strongest walls, it can get past the deepest foundations. If you're dedicated enough, it can get past any counter tunneling operation. It's literally just a slow, unstoppable force as long as the tunnelers are determined enough. It is an S tier strategy, it really is. It abuses the physics engine of the game. Physics never gets patched. Physics always wins. And now, my dear students, I hope you are paying attention because it is time for Professor Siege Captain's quiz. There will be 2 questions for you today. First person to get them right without Googling. Now, I will know if you Googled these answers. I have a friend in the FBI who will run all of your Google searches and we will WikiLeaks your Google searches. Do not Google these answers. You need to watch the episode to know the answers. The first question. At what city was being sieged, I should say? The siege of what? Did the Roman troops successfully dig underneath the walls and come out through the floor of the Temple of Juno? Question 2. What animal was used to fuel the fires at Rochester Castle due to their high fat content increasing the heat of the fire? The first person to get these quiz questions right will be able to skip this week's homework assignment. That's right, I'm assigning homework this week. This week's homework assignment is simple as liking and subscribing. Got 'em. You have to do your homework if you want to pass my class. And that concludes today's lecture. Hopefully you learned enough to ensure that your troops aren't going to die a horrible death inside the tunnels. And also you learned enough that you will be successful at your next siege. And thank you for coming to my lecture. We have a finite time on this planet and you chose to spend some of that with me. It really means a lot to me. Thank you for the incredible response, students, on the last couple of episodes. Lots of comments, lots of likes, lots of interactions. Let's keep that up. That's what I'm doing it for. I'm trying to build a siege community. Speaking of a siege community, if you want to continue the dialogue, I started a subreddit. It's called r/siege weapons of history. Also, as stated before at the beginning of the episode, I am an eternal student. Please comment below anything I got wrong or anything I missed. Also comment below any interesting facts about tunneling or sapping or undermining that you know. I love learning about this kind of stuff. This concludes my lecture. Go forth, go dig a hole this weekend, why not? Never enter a tunnel during an active siege, and hopefully you learned that sometimes the best way to get over something is to go under it. Class dismissed, you tunnel snakes. Roman consul Marcus Fluvius Nobilior, I'm sorry, Latin is not my strong suit, I'm sorry, Latin is not my strong suit. Marcus Fluvius Nobilior. Marcus Fulvius Nobilior's